Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Louis Gilbert, and I'm the French Foreign Law Specialist at the Law Library of Congress. And welcome to this Foreign and Comparative Law webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing the evolution of citizenship laws in the DRC. Now, if you have any questions, we ask that you submit them through the question and answer feature. Just click the question and answer button at the bottom of your Zoom and input your question and hit send, and I'll respond to them at the end of this presentation. All right. Now, welcome to those of you just joining us. Now, citizenship law in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DRC, lies at the intersection of borders, identity, and conflict. In this presentation, I'll trace the legal construction of Congolese nationality from the colonial period to the present, with particular attention to the North Kivu region, and examine how successive governments have used citizenship laws to regulate territory, population, and political authority. We will explore how nationality law continues to function as a structural driver of conflict in the Eastern DRC, and how citizenship is not merely a status, but a legal instrument with far-reaching security implications. Now, with laws rooted in ethnic criteria, particularly the emphasis on indigenous tribal membership, inhabitants of the Kivu region and the DRC, and in particular the Banyarwanda community, remained in a precarious legal position, their nationality subject to ongoing political debates and exclusion. Despite reforms, the issue of Banyarwanda citizenship in the DRC remains unresolved, fueling significant social and political tensions. So I'll first explain who the Banyarwanda are and why Kivu is such a contested space. Then we'll trace the evolution of Congolese nationality law, and finally, we'll look at today's framework and current reform debates. So, I'll start talking about the Banyarwanda, as you've heard me refer to them. The name refers to the inhabitants of Rwanda, who call themselves Rwandans and live on an identifiable territory within its current boundaries, dating back to May 1910. The term Banyarwanda also designates the Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa populations living in regions of the DRC that border Rwanda. Since language determines the identity of ethnic groups in the DRC, the Banyarwanda are principally the populations living in these Congolese territories within their post-May 1910 boundaries and speaking the Kinyarwanda language. Now, Kinyarwanda is a Bantu language and the national language of Rwanda. It's spoken by the entire population, with nearly 11 million speakers, with minor dialectical variations specific to certain regions, especially in the north and west of the country. It's also spoken in southern Uganda, northwestern Tanzania, and eastern DRC. Now, you might hear me refer to the DRC as the Congo, Belgian Congo, or Zaire. So the current DRC was known as Zaire, or République du Zaire, in its long form between 1971 and 1997. Now, just to give you quick historical and geographical context, I'm going to start this presentation out by first discussing historical population distributions and movements in the Eastern Congo, which will help us then understand the significance of the successive legal reforms that altered Congolese citizenship, both pre and post-independence. Now, the original inhabitants of the DRC region bordering Rwanda and Burundi, the origin of the Banyarwanda in the DRC trace back to both pre-colonial and colonial history. Bantu-speaking populations, including the Banande, Bahunde, and Banyarwanda, have lived in the eastern part of modern-day DRC, north of the Virunga volcanoes, between lakes Kivu, Edward, and Albert for centuries. These groups were neighbors to the kingdom of Bunyoro, a Bantu kingdom in western Uganda, and Rwanda, which emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries. The Bantu people are an ethno-linguistic grouping of approximately 400 distinct indigenous African ethnic groups that speak Bantu languages. These languages are native to countries across a broad region extending from West Africa to Central Africa. The region's geography and oral histories provide insight into the history of these clans, which transcends modern political boundaries. Before the Belgian colonial period, the areas that make up the east of the DRC today were controlled by customary chiefs and Kinyarwanda-speaking peoples, mainly the Tutsi, Hutu, and Twa, under the Rwandan king, the Mwami. Genealogies of some dominant clans suggest settlement in North Kivu as early as 1636 and as late as 1847. These clans integrated both Hutu and Tutsi social categories and formed part of the same cultural continuum known as the Abasangwa Butake, first occupants. These ancestries predate the organized migration of Banyarwanda people between 1936 and 1955. Now, colonial borders later divided the Banyarwanda people across the DRC, Uganda, and Tanzania, and Burundi, where they are now called Banyabwisha, Bamfubira, and Baha. Most people of Rwandan culture and language live in the neighboring countries rather than in Rwanda. These populations often face discrimination or stigmatization due to their origins and are sometimes confused with refugees from Rwanda's crises in 1959, 63, 73, and 1994. We'll further discuss this land division in just a moment. Now, as you've heard me mention the Kivu regions a few times now, it's important to define what we mean when we're talking about Kivu. North and South Kivu, um, there are regions that were both part of a former province in the eastern part of the DRC. North and South Kivu are known for their abundant mineral, environmental, and fossil resources. As a gateway between the Great Lakes region and Central Africa, Kivu, known as Africa's coltan capital, is coveted by Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda. The common term coltan, a contraction of Colombo tantalite, is used in Central Africa to refer to an ore containing tantalum and niobium, two metals that are strategic for modern technologies. It is found in the tin belt that stretches from North Kivu province in the north to Katanga, passing through South Kivu and Maniema provinces. Now, artisanal mining has accounted for 90% of production in recent years, which means that this ore is readily accessible and it lends itself to relatively simple extraction and processing techniques. In 1998, under Mobutu, Kivu was divided into three provinces, which was North Kivu, South Kivu, and Maniema. This division was done officially in the name of decentralization, but historical sources suggest it was driven by political calculations. This division of Kivu was presented as an administrative experiment, but in practice, it served primarily to weaken the pockets of opposition and redistribute power to local elites. We'll come back to this division in a later section of this presentation. Now, following the emergence of local armed groups in the 1990s, widespread insecurity took hold in the Kivu provinces, with regular attacks on civilians and villages. These violent acts in the eastern part of the country often stem from rivalries over land ownership, which fuel ethnic tensions, whose roots frequently date back to the colonial era, as we're just about to see. Now, on this slide, we can see what I was referring to with the term artisanal mining. So these are often open air extraction sites worked on by hand with rudimentary tools. So these are much harder to regulate, which often leads to more dangerous conditions. Now, we're going to talk about Belgian colonization and the territorial administration of these regions. Now, from 1885 onward, European colonization drastically altered the Congo, culminating in the establishment of the Belgian Congo in 1908 under King Leopold II. Now, to take it way back, initially, the Berlin Conference in 1885 solidified Belgium's control, with the United States recognizing Belgian rule over the territory. The country was then governed as a dictatorship under King Leopold's État indépendant du Congo, the Congo Free State. Leopold II's regime introduced the first nationality rules back in 1892, and these were primarily based on jus soli, which is birthright citizenship, allowing foreign-born children to opt for Congolese nationality. These laws allowed naturalization for neighboring Africans after 5 years of residence. In 1908, Belgium annexed the Congo, transforming it into the Belgian Congo. The Congolese were considered Belgian nationals, but without the rights afforded to white Belgians. Borders were redrawn in 1910, ceding parts of the Congo to Rwanda and Uganda. When the League of Nations granted Rwanda-Urundi to Belgium in 1922, nationality confusion deepened for those in the former German territories, rendering them effectively stateless. The ethnic crystallization that followed in the 1920s disrupted existing clan realities. Before this period, small groups migrated across the DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi, but the tribal regrouping of 1920 reduced them to a single ethnic identity. Immigrants came into lands that were already occupied by Twa or Mbuti pygmies. This transplantation of Banyarwanda immigrants was initially driven by the Belgian colonial administration, negotiated with Rwandan customary authorities, and imposed on Congolese customary leaders. This complex colonial legacy influenced Congo's nationality laws, which remained contentious until independence in 1960, when the Congo finally emerged as a sovereign state under President Joseph Kasavubu and Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. Mhm. Now, a significant number of the colonial intentions and measures that reshaped the demographic makeup of the Eastern Congo region appear in their Bulletin officiel de l'État indépendant du Congo. So this is the official gazette of the colonial administration. This publication, grounded in Belgian law, set out legal provisions specific to the Congo. It also included reports to the king, quote unquote, which presented an idealized account of colonial actions while providing insight into the objectives underlying the legislation. I'm going to follow this up with some illustrations of some of the legal texts that I found. I just want to highlight that this presentation today is the result of extensive research. I reviewed not only the Law Library of Congress's collections of Congolese law and our holdings of Belgian Congo legislation, but I also consulted the Belgian National Library's collection of legal materials. I also relied on the work of historians, particularly Congolese historians, who have documented population movements, migration patterns, and the political developments of the DRC from the colonial period to the present. I also spent substantial time examining these Belgian legal gazettes I just mentioned from the late 19th century to extract, corroborate, and contextualize information and to address gaps in the historical records. In my opinion, it's one thing to hear that events occurred which scarred a population, and it's another to see the foundation of those events set out in legislation. Now, back to these texts in question from the late 19th century, we're going to start with the Ordinance of July 1st, 1885, which provided that all quote unquote vacant lands belonged to the Belgian state. Now, in practice, the administration treated most of the land in the Congo as vacant, as it did not recognize indigenous systems of land tenure. The ordinance also allowed individuals or company that had already taken possession of land prior to the adoption of the law to retain those holdings. Next, the Decree of September 14, 1886. In its Article 2, it states that land owned by indigenous peoples was to be managed and regulated by local chiefs. Now, this may seem like a detail, but this provision will come into play later as a different population start to immigrate into the Congo, and the structure of chiefdoms gets switched around a lot. So we just need to remember that, yes, the local chiefs were given some power. Next, the Decree of November 8th, 1888 established the conditions for entering into labor contracts with indigenous persons. These contracts permitted the relocation of workers from their place of residence to designated work sites. In the report to the king attached to the decree, so just to explain it really quick, usually you'll have the articles, and then in between articles, you have these little sections called report to the king. So they're still part of the legislation. They're not articles themselves, but they are a little bit more narrative driven little bits, but it's very interesting that they're in the legal gazette. So these contracts, yeah. In the report to the king attached to these decrees that I was just talking about, the colonial administration characterized indigenous persons as having the legal status of minors. Next, the Order of March 28th, 1890, supplemented the 1888 decree by creating a system of worker permits to facilitate cross-border labor movements. As you can imagine, this is going to become much more important later. Next, the Decree of November 28, 1893 allows for colonial administrators to require indigenous populations to work to cover expenses of protecting them from slave raids. So yes, they were asked to work for free to protect them from being slaves. Further, a 1900 report to the king describes a system of taxation imposed on the indigenous population. The system allowed taxes to be paid in kind, including through labor. What's interesting is that the report follows a section stating that the administration had abolished slavery. And then it then went on to explain that the indigenous labor often served to meet tax obligations and to fund protection against slave raids. We're now going to start talking about the migration into Kivu. Just before I do this, I want you to look at this map over here, and the darker colors, especially the brown, are going to be representative of higher population densities. And the one thing I do really want to point out is that the population density, population distribution doesn't respect borders. That is going to be important as we move forward. Now, according to Congolese historian Noël Obotel-Arachidi, one characteristic of ancient Congolese society is their extreme mobility. He points out that the notion of sedentary population is a tradition of colonial ethnography, which was part of a larger divide and conquer policy. Now, we're going to talk about the Belgian organized migration. Between 1916 and 1962, Rwanda and Burundi were part of the Belgian colonial empire. The detailed reports of the colonial administration in the former Mandate and Trust territories constitute an interesting source for research on Belgium's colonial past. Belgian colonial policy shaped the Banyarwanda population in the Congo. After World War I, Belgium received a League of Nations mandate over Rwanda-Urundi, now Rwanda and Burundi, as we've mentioned previously. This happened in 1922. Confronted with Rwanda's overpopulation, the Belgian authorities implemented a policy of organized transplantation, relocating tens of thousands of Rwandans to the North Kivu region of the Congo to work on plantations. This large-scale resettlement began in 1926, and by 1955, around 160,000 Rwandans had been relocated. These workers, hired under contract, retained their property in Rwanda and their Rwandan nationality. They periodically returned to Rwanda for vacations and had the freedom to return permanently at the end of their contracts. Throughout this period, they remained under the protection of their home country. Beginning in the 1920s, Belgian authorities organized forced and supervised migrations of people from Rwanda-Urundi to the Congo, once again, particularly to the regions of North and South Kivu, in order to address both the local food crisis and the labor needs of Congolese plantations and mines. In the face of the famines that occurred from 1923 to 1925, and then from 1927 to 28, the Belgian administration imposed, quote unquote, work in the workers' own interest, a policy in order to stabilize food production and generate exportable surpluses. Starting in 1924, colonial laws regulated mandatory labor and the use of forced labor for major construction projects, export crops, and portage under the guise of agricultural modernization. In practice, these laws on indigenous labor and labor contracts authorized the forced mobilization of peasants to Congolese mines and plantations, particularly in Kivu, by combining legal obligations, production quotas, and local administrative control. Beginning in 1937, and especially in 1949, the agricultural colonization of Kivu was formalized through large-scale supervised land allocation operations, subsequently entrusted to the Banyarwanda Immigration Mission, the MIB, tasked with organizing the local labor force. Approximately 25,000 Rwandans were officially settled in Kivu in 1949. And in total, more than 150,000 hectares were granted to Banyarwanda migrants under this program. By the time of independence, there were approximately 40,000 families, that's nearly 200,000 people, who had been resettled or born there. This transplantation built upon pre-existing patterns of migrations. As we mentioned previously, for centuries, small groups had moved across the Congo, Rwanda, Burundi. In addition to these resettled populations, there are also natives, private immigrants, and refugees, totaling around 2 million people, mainly in North and South Kivu. This population, speaking Kinyarwanda, includes both Hutu and Tutsi people. For these people, settling in these areas did not feel like moving into foreign territory. They were likely unaware that they were leaving one state to settle in another, as Belgium had established a personal union between Congo and Rwanda-Urundi since 1925. The settlers and their descendants therefore became subjects of the Congo, just like the other tribes of the Belgian colony. Once settled, they were integrated into the local population. Now, after independence, the Congolese state was progressively divided into districts. The first officially defined administrative divisions. Not all of these districts were established on the same day. The number of districts increased from 11 in 1888 to 22 in 1912. The 22 districts established in 1912 were divided among 4 provinces, which were increased to 6 provinces in 1933. Under colonial rule, the purpose of territorial division was to ensure more effective control over the country and to keep taxpayers in check in order to better exploit the colony economically. This objective was very clearly articulated in the decrees on indigenous districts. Now, during the First Congolese Republic from 1960 to 1965, the political class, citing political and social imperatives linked in particular to ethnic conflicts, such as that between the Lulua and Luba, set about creating new provinces. The 1960 Constitution, supplemented by a 1962 law, established criteria for their creation. Usually they cited population, resource requirements, or political imperatives. But these criteria served primarily as a pretext to increase the number of provinces for electoral purposes. Thus, from 6 provinces in 1960, the country went to 16 in 1962, then to 21 in 1963. These new mini provinces were often economically unviable. Moreover, their creation did not ease the ethnic tensions it was supposed to resolve. Divisions in Kasai and internal rivalries along Baluba groups persisted despite the administrative fragmentation. During the Second Republic, Mobutu reorganizes the provinces, creating or abolishing administrative units in a manner that rewarded his allies and consolidated his power. Mobutu first reduced the number of provinces, disregarding the legal criteria for economic viability, and then multiplied territories, districts, and cities according to the political interests of the moment. The redistricting aimed at electoral objectives, with each territory entitling its representative to a seat in parliament and gifts to his allies, with new entities created where his close associates were located. Despite this redistricting, internal conflicts between clans persisted, demonstrating that the proliferation of entities did not resolve local tensions. Now, speaking of tensions, the Kenya-Rwanda War that lasted from 1963 to 1965 erupted in North Kivu due to ethnic tensions after the country's independence from Belgium in 1960. Banyarwanda, especially Tutsi and Hutu from Masisi and Goma, Goma is the capital of North Kivu, clashed with local Nande, Hunde, and Nyanga groups. Nande leader Denis Paluku declared autonomy for North Kivu, with support from the Hunde and Nyanga, but faced opposition from the Tutsis and Hutus from Masisi. The Tutsis faced violent repression, backed by the central Congolese government. The conflict ended when Mobutu seized power in 1965 and disbanded the provincial forces, but tensions between the groups persisted. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about how the later population movements happened post-colonialism. Now, beginning in November 1959, political unrest in Rwanda prior to its independence had led many Rwandan refugees to seek shelter in Kivu. However, in 1967, the Congolese government abolished the refugee camps managed by the United Nations Human Rights Commission, or the UNHCR. As a result, these refugees were absorbed into the local population over a 30-year period. The arrival of Tutsi refugees and their settlement in the Masisi region led to a significant economic boom, primarily through cattle breeding. However, this development did not meet the expectations of the indigenous Hunde population, who became a minority and struggled to integrate into the new economic dynamic. While development in the region centered on cattle breeding, the Hunde, along with Nyanga and Tembo, were primarily farmers. This contributed to their political marginalization as Rwanda's internal conflicts, particularly the Hutu-Tutsi ethnic divide, were exported to the DRC. In March 1993, tensions in North Kivu escalated into open violence. And in April 1994, the Rwandan Civil War and the genocide spilled over into the DRC. Initially, Rwandan Tutsis fled across the border, followed by several 100,000 Hutus after the military victory of the Tutsi-dominated Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF. Once in the Congo, Rwandan Hutu militias continued attacks on Congolese Tutsi, reigniting hostilities and intensifying the violence between Tutsi and Hutu communities in the Congo. Now that we've gotten through a lot of this history, we can now discuss the political status of these successive waves of immigrants and refugees. Now, in the 1950s, the nationality of children born to Banyarwanda immigrants was at the heart of a debate among colonial administration officials. The Belgian administration was aware that these immigrants had settled en masse and that the Banyarwanda immigrants, which were about 80% of the population, far outnumbered the local population and its traditional fiefdom. The incorporation and integration of Banyarwanda immigrants into the local Hunde chiefdoms was the political and administrative option chosen by the colonial powers. But the precipitous independence of the Belgian Congo left unresolved questions about their political rights. From 1977 onward, the mountainous territory of Masisi experienced an unprecedented economic boom, driven by the establishment of modern farms by the Tutsi businessmen. However, this economic growth created significant problems for the indigenous population. The acquisition of farms, which required the purchase of land, occurred at the expense of the local farming communities. Under a still traditional land tenure system, it was the customary chief holding rights over the land who decided on its sale, often disregarding the interests of the local population. Now, we briefly mentioned, if you'll go back with me, the 1886 decree earlier, and we've also discussed how the Banyarwanda populations had been integrated into the local chiefdoms. And if you remember the 1886 decree, it gave a lot of power to these chiefs. And so now we have the Belgian colonial administration putting these new immigrants in charge of the land. This new form of wealth did not benefit everyone. And farmers not only lost their land, but were also marginalized in the new economy. Some local politicians exploited these grievances to gain support, portraying the Tutsi as foreigners who had usurped the rights of the Congolese. This narrative eventually led to efforts to revoke the Congolese citizenship of the Tutsi population. So, all of this historical background brings us to discussing the evolution of the legal framework on Congolese citizenship. Now, just to go back a little bit, at the start of the colonial period, the children born to Banyarwanda immigrants were Belgian subjects, with the same colonial status as other Congolese, according to the provisions of the December 27th, 1892 decree. However, by introducing the notion of qualified voters and eligible candidates, in a March 23, 1960 law on elections in preparation for independence, the Belgian parliament instituted a clear distinction between Congolese nationals and immigrant nationals, and two different ways of identifying them. In the post-colonial era, Congolese legislators used this distinction to include or exclude Banyarwanda immigrants from the Congolese nation. Now, we just discussed the decree of December 27, 1892, just to give a little bit more detail on it, stipulated that nationality could be acquired by birth of Congolese parents, by naturalization, by legal presumption, or by option. This means that a child born on Congolese territory of unknown or stateless parents was presumed to be Congolese, as was a child found on Congolese soil unless proven otherwise. So a child born in the Congo to foreign parents could, within a year of reaching majority, apply for Congolese nationality by explicit declaration, or it was presumed acquired if the child had resided in the Congo for the previous 4 years. By integrating the children of foreign parents and immigrants who would come to work in the Congo and granting them full Congolese status, King Leopold II's primary aim here was to increase the number of his Congolese subjects. Now, we're going to take a look. We're going to a little bit forward. We're going to look at this law of March 23, 1960. This law gave the right to vote to Congolese nationals. Men born of Congolese mother and Rwanda-Urundi nationals residing in the Congo for at least 10 years were given the right to vote. The Rwanda-Urundi nationals who moved to the Congo between 1950 and 1955 were excluded from voting status by virtue of the 10-year residence requirement, and constituted the first batch of stateless Banyarwanda immigrants. The Belgian parliament had just laid the foundation for a conflict of political rights between the Banyarwanda immigrants and the Houndé natives, who now considered them second-class citizens. Now, just a quick mention of the Fundamental Law of May 1960. This was voted to prevent a legal vacuum after independence. So the Belgian parliament passed the 1960 Fundamental Law, and in Article 2 of this law retained all the laws that were enforced in the colony. So the independent Congo first addressed nationality in its 1964 constitution, also known as the Luluabourg Constitution. So this constitution marked the first major overhaul of nationality laws in the post-independence Congo. It established a restrictive definition of citizenship based on the principle of single and exclusive Congolese nationality. The Constitution defined Congolese citizens as individuals with an ancestor who belonged to a tribe established in the Congo before October 18, 1908. See, so this was voted in 1964, and this definition effectively excluded many recent immigrants who had settled after that date. The Constitution also prohibited dual nationality and mandated that other nationality rules be determined by law. The following year, a decree law detailed the framework for acquiring and losing Congolese nationality as followed. You could acquire it by descent. It could be passed on from a Congolese father to a child born in wedlock, or from a Congolese mother if the child was born out of wedlock. This law discriminated based on the parent's sex and the child's legitimacy. There was a presumption of nationality. For a newborn found in the Congo was presumed Congolese unless proven otherwise. There was also naturalization after 15 years of residence. Or through marriage, a woman marrying a Congolese man could acquire nationality through declaration. But it also included an automatic loss of nationality, as we just mentioned, which meant that acquiring or retaining foreign nationality resulted in the automatic loss of Congolese nationality. The government could also strip naturalized citizens of their nationality by presidential decree for crimes against the state, long prison sentences, or action deemed incompatible with Congolese nationality or harmful to the state's interests. Now, moving on to a little bit later legislation. On February 25th, 1969, the Congolese government replaced le certificat d'indigène du Congo belge, so translates to the Belgian Congo native certificate, with a citizen's identity card through Ordinance 6967. However, when distributing the new cards in 1970, political authorities in the Masisi region refused to issue them to Banyarwanda immigrants, claiming that they were not Congolese nationals. This led to the establishment of an ad hoc commission to investigate the issue in Kivu and Kinshasa. The Mouvement Populaire de la Révolution, or People's Revolutionary Movement, a political party started by Mobutu, recognized Banyarwanda immigrants in Masisi as full Congolese citizens on July 28, 1970. President Mobutu formalized this decision with Ordinance Law number 71020, which recognized rather than granted Congolese nationality to individuals from Rwanda, Urundi, who had been residing in the Congo since June 30, 1960. The law's sole provision declared that these individuals were deemed to have acquired Congolese nationality as of that date. However, this recognition became controversial. Critics argue that the MPR had erred in collectively granting Congolese nationality to the Banyarwanda residing in the Congo since 1960, potentially including Rwandan political refugees from 1959 and 1960. Next, we have the law number 72002 of January 5th, 1972. Political developments in the Great Lakes region worsened the situation of the Banyarwanda in the Congo in 1972. That year, a genocide against the Hutu occurred in Burundi. The brutality of the Burundian genocide made the Tutsi unpopular across the region, while over 200 Hutu were forced into exile. The arrival of these refugees in Kivu heightened the insecurity of earlier immigrants, including those who had fled in 1959, prompting them to seek protection from the government in Kinshasa. Influenced by Binsengimana, a Tutsi refugee from Rwanda, and President Mobutu's chief of staff, an amendment to the law on citizenship granted citizenship status to anyone residing in the DRC before the arrival of these new refugees. Law 72002 replaced the 1971 Ordinance Law. You can see both of these on the slide right here, and nullified its effects. Now, Article 15 of the new law introduced a significant change. Only those Banyarwanda immigrants who had settled in the Congo before January 1st, 1950, and continued to reside there until the law's enactment were recognized as having acquired Zairian nationality, Congolese nationality, on June 30th, 1960. This marked a departure from the earlier inclusive approach, excluding those who arrived between 1950 and 1955, as well as spontaneous immigrants between 1955 and 1958, rendering them stateless once again. Rwandan refugees from 1960 could only acquire Congolese nationality through an individual application process, requiring them to renounce their Rwandan nationality. The law also reiterated the ethnic basis of Congolese nationality found in the 1964 Constitution, linking nationality to membership in one of the tribes established within the borders of the Republic of Zaire as of November 15, 1908. It detailed rules for acquiring and losing nationality, including provisions for naturalization, nationality by descent, and the prohibition of dual nationality. Now, despite its comprehensive framework, the new law lacked implementing measures, complicating the legal status of Banyarwanda immigrants and intensifying debates over their nationality. Now, this brings us to the law of June 29th, 1981. The recognition of Zairean nationality for the Banyarwanda immigrants, established by the Political Bureau's decision on March 26, 1971, and later modified by the 1972 law, these two laws that we've just discussed, faced opposition from the indigenous Hunde, Nande, and Nyaga communities. These groups contested the collective granting of nationality to the Banyarwanda. The law of June 29, 1981 challenged the Zairean nationality acquired by many Banyarwanda in 1972. This particularly affected the Masisi region, home to Rwandans transplanted from 1920 to 1940, and Rwandan Tutsi refugees from the 1959 and 1963 repressions. Now, key provisions of the 1981 law included the following. Article 4 of the 1981 law stated that a Zairean was defined as a person whose ancestors were a member of one of the tribes established within the territory of the Republic of Zaire as of August 1st, 1885. So we're going all the way back. And Article 55 stated that the law repealed the law 72002 and took effect on the date of its promulgation. So just to summarize, the 1981 law rejected collective acquisition of nationality, effectively nullifying any collective attribution granted under Article 15 of the 1972 law. Now, this retroactive impact significantly altered the citizenship status of many Banyarwanda in Congo. Finally, I'm just going to mention Ordinance number 8261 of May 15, 1982. This implemented the 1981 law, and it nullified the nationality certificates issued under the 1972 more inclusive law. As a result, Banyarwanda immigrants living in the Congo before January 1st, 1950, who could not claim any nationality other than that recognized by Article 50 of the 1972 law, those people became stateless. This also applied to Banyarwanda immigrants who had arrived between 1950 and 1958, who had been explicitly excluded by the 1972 legislation. So by the early 80s, the nationality laws had been repeatedly used to redraw the boundary of belonging for Banyarwanda communities in Kivu. This brings us now to the currently applicable law. So, the 2004 law on nationality is the applicable legislation in the DRC today. Under Congolese law, the acquisition and loss of Congolese nationality is governed by the Constitution and by law number 0424 of November 12, 2004 on Congolese nationality. The law affirms that Congolese nationality is one and exclusive and establishes two legal statuses for Congolese nationality: nationality by origin and nationality by acquisition. Now, I'll start off by nationally by origin. Under the 2004 law, the citizenship by origin is granted to any person belonging to the ethnic groups and nationalities whose people and territory made up what became the Congo at independence. So, 2004 law is less restrictive. We're bumping that date up from the 1800s to 1960. Also, a child with at least one Congolese parent, also unacknowledged children born on Congolese soil, and children with a stateless parent or a parent whose nationality is not transmissible by descent. So these provisions retain an origin-based conception of nationality while combining it with parentage-based and territory-based rules. So the 2004 law also established nationality by acquisition. Now, Congolese nationality by acquisition is individual and subject to general conditions, including being of legal age, expressly submitting an individual declaration, renouncing any other nationalities, speaking one of the Congolese languages, being of good character, having been a permanent resident of the DRC for 7 years at the time of application, and not having engaged in acts incompatible with Congolese status or prejudicial to the interests of the DRC, and not having been convicted of serious offenses. Now, nationality by acquisition may be obtained through naturalization, adoption, marriage, if 7 years have passed since the marriage, birth, and residence. To close that one out, Article 26 of the 2004 law stipulates that any person who acquires a foreign nationality loses Congolese nationality, consistent with the one and exclusive principle. The law, however, provides for the possibility of recovering lost Congolese nationality by decree, which in turn entails the loss of the other nationality that has been acquired. Now, there are a few limits to the current framework. Earlier laws tied nationality to ethnic presence between 1908 or even 1885, which excluded many Banyarwanda who arrived later. The 2004 law instead looks to the peoples and territories that made up the Congo at independence, and it extends nationality by origin to their descendants through either maternal or paternal lines. Now, while the 2004 law broadens the definition of nationality and clarifies individual paths to acquisition, it does not conclusively resolve citizenship issues for Kinyarwanda and Kirundi-speaking communities. A central challenge here lies in identifying quote unquote authentic ethnic groups, a process that is highly politicized and complex given the DRC's history of migratory movements and colonization that we've just discussed. Article 6 requires groups seeking recognition to prove their ancestors' presence on Congolese territory by a specific date and to demonstrate ownership or control of part of the Congo's territory. Now, this effectively creates a system of ethnic citizenship under which historically excluded groups such as the Banyarwanda may still be denied Congolese nationality by political actors who can exploit these criteria. The law thus perpetuates long-standing citizenship challenges for Kinyarwanda-speaking people in the DRC. Now, looking ahead, we see how this is still a problem to this day with potential reforms. In 2021, the bill known as the Chiani Law was drafted by Noel Chiani Muadianvita, a former candidate in the 2018 presidential election, and was formally introduced in the National Assembly on July 8th, 2021, so pretty recent. Now, first introduced in 2021, it was quickly dismissed, but then brought back into the political debate in 2023. It is commonly referred to as the Congolese Identity Law, or the Chiani Law, in reference to its initiator. The explanatory memorandum of the proposed law highlights two main objectives. First, to restrict access to positions of sovereignty, notably the presidency, and certain high-level offices, so as to reserve them for Congolese citizens born to Congolese parents. Second, to enshrine the irrevocability of Congolese nationality by birth, so that Congolese nationals by birth no longer automatically lose it upon acquiring another nationality, unless they expressly renounce it. Now, at the heart of the debate lies the concept of Congoleseness, which refers to the idea of, quote unquote, a pure national identity based on having both parents of Congolese descent. In practice, this concept creates two categories of Congolese by origin. Those who meet the Congolese father and mother criterion were fully eligible for the highest offices. And those who, although Congolese by origin under the 2004 law, have certain political rights restricted because of a foreign parent. This proposal sparked controversy among politicians, civil society, churches, and human rights organizations, which view it as a discriminatory and contrary to the principle of equality among citizens enshrined in the Constitution. Critics highlight its potential for targeted exclusion, particularly of political figures with a foreign parent, and view it as a tool that could be used to stifle political competition rather than to genuinely protect national sovereignty. Now, debates questioning Congolese citizenship continue today, revealing the persistence of identity-based division in defining, quote unquote, who is truly Congolese, mainly through the current discussions on constitutional reform. Now, this is reigniting fears of political manipulation regarding nationality, even though it is proclaimed as one and exclusive. Now, just to close this out, to conclude, we've seen how Congolese citizenship laws have been constructed and then reconstructed from the colonial era all the way to today, with profound effects on borders, identity, and conflict in North and South Kivu. We traced how Belgian colonial policies organized Banyarwanda migration and shifting post-independence territorial and nationality regimes repeatedly and redefining who counted as indigenous, who became stateless, and who could participate fully in political life. Now, taken together, these developments demonstrate that citizenship in the DRC is not only a legal status, but a strategic instrument for regulating territory, managing demographic change, and shaping political competition, often at the expense of minority communities in Kivu. As the country considers further constitutional and legislative reform, the challenge will be to move from exclusionary, ethnically framed notions of belonging towards a more inclusive, rights-based understanding of nationality that reduces rather than entrenches the structural drivers of conflict in the East. All right. Thank you so much for attending today. I'm now going to see if there are any questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer these as best I can. All right. Let me see. Let's see. Let me see. Q&A. I'm just getting into the section. Would 23andMe or Ancestry.com help with ID issues? I think, yeah. So, for a lot of the more restrictive laws, yes, it would serve as a one of the proofs. Well, it could be a source of proof to prove Congolese heritage if you can prove that you do belong to one of these tribes that were in the territory at independence. I don't know if it would be enough on its own. Usually, they look for a multitude of factors. Okay, thank you, Benton. Well, not much of a. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other questions, but if you do have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out via the Ask a Librarian function on the Law Library of Congress's website. They will orient those to me as long as you say, Belgian Congo, you can frame them. And if you ask a question through that, I can give you a more detailed answer in writing. What percentage? We have another question. Because of exclusion, what is the proportion of the population that has access to the right to vote? So all citizens have the right to vote. Oh yeah, I'm assuming you're asking about those that have been excluded by these definitions. I don't have the exact number right now. I'm not going to try to make it up. I can try to get back to you on that, but just to give an educated, not a guess, but an educated estimation, I would say it's rather low nowadays because the 2004 law is a little bit more inclusive. It's a bit better. What I was trying to highlight in this presentation is that it's still being questioned to this day, and it's still in jeopardy, is what I'm saying. So not a lot of people have lost their right to vote. There are still a few of the Banyarwanda population in North Kivu that probably cannot vote, but I'd love to look more into that, and I can answer that question if you Submit it through the Ask a Librarian. Hmm. Well, oh, I have another question. Was the time? Ooh, was the Chiani proposal part of the international nativism movements? Brexit, European anti-migrant, rise of MAGA, etc. Hmm. I can't give you a conclusive answer on the political inclination or motivations behind it. Um, just based off of what I've been studying, I my research is much more towards the past and looking how the colonial heritage really influenced how politicians use these nationality laws to try to gain political advantage. So I can't conclusively say yes. Are we seeing this kind of speech and these kind of policies grow around the world? Yes, you could say there's that in part, but I can't conclusively answer that one with a yes or no. All right. Oh, thank you. All right. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any further questions. Thank you so much for attending. And it's been a real pleasure researching this. And I can't tell you how many hours I've spent in front of old Belgian texts from the 1800s, uh, reading every single law bit by bit. Is fun, but not always. Yes, there will be there will be a publication of the whole presentation on our website. It'll be re you can rewatch this, is what I'm saying. All right. Well, I'll just stick around for just a few to see if there's any more, but otherwise, thank you so much. And everyone have a great rest of your day.